In other words, you do not want to paraphrase something when the wording, the exact wording, the tone, the word choice, the syntax, when it all has a certain emotion or impact that would otherwise be lost if you reworded or paraphrased. A lot of famous speeches or a lot of primary sources like literature, if being analyzed, a lot of times you don't want to change some of that primary source because it will alter the meaning in itself. That's when you use those types of quotations, when you want to pull in something where the exact word, meaning, or tone would otherwise be lost if it wasn't preserved in the original quote. Here is an example. So the source itself, it has begun, it is awful, continuous, and earthquaking. And so if we were going to that primary source and we were going to create a quote that encapsulated all of that, it would look as if it would look like the second example. One nurse described an artillery exchange between the two sides. She wrote, and then the quote is introduced, "It has begun. It is awful, continuous, and earthquaking." And then you have your in-text citation at the end of the sentence. Now, say for instance, you just want to extract certain keywords or certain emotional highlights to fit within a sentence that you may already have written. The bottom example is one example of that. One nurse described an artillery exchange between the two sides as, quote, awful, continuous, and earthquaking, quote, and then the source. So in that case, the author has strategically picked the words that are most pivotal in terms of the context and meaning of that sentence, extracted them, and put them in the grammar of their sentence. When it comes to quotations, you can use them and manipulate them however you want, however suits your topic, your content, your purpose. If you want to extract certain words, if you want to cut or nix maybe the middle part of a sentence or cut out the beginning of a sentence and just have the last part, you can manipulate quotation. You can manipulate those quotes however suits your purpose. I try to encourage people not to do too much of that. I mean, it's okay. The content is yours when you decide to use quotes, but just remember that the way that you're integrating your quotes, how you format them, what you cut out, what you omit, what you leave in, that's all going to be a reflection of your ethos and credibility. In other words, when the reader is seeing that a quote has been manipulated so many times, it may beg the question, is this being purposefully manipulated for some reason because of a bias or a certain vested interest in the topic, etc. So you have to be mindful that other people are going to be questioning your ethos, your trust, your trustworthiness and authoritativeness when it comes to how you use your quotes and what you omit and what you leave in. The other way to do this or to integrate sources is by paraphrasing. This happens most of the time. Again, 80-20 is the rule you want to shoot for. 20% quotes, 80% your own words or paraphrasing in some way. Paraphrasing refers to preserving information from a source, but not its exact wording. In other words, it's not verbatim. It uses vocabulary and sentence structure that is largely different from the language in the original. A lot of people mess up and a lot of people fall victim to plagiarism because they take a certain sentence from a source and change one or two words to a different word or change the verb. However, that's considered plagiarism. The sentence structure has to be your own. It cannot be a copy of the same sentence with just different words substituted or only minor parts of that sentence being changed. It has to be a completely different sentence. The idea can remain the same, but it has to be a completely different sentence, and you still have to cite your source. You have to make an attribution or an in-text citation, provide the reference citation, even if you're paraphrasing. It's not just for quotes. It is very important that you remember that. A paraphrase may preserve specialized vocabulary shared by everyone in a field or discipline, jargon in other words. Otherwise, the writer paraphrasing a source starts fresh, creating new sentences that repurpose the information in the source so that the information plays a supportive role in its new location. That's hinting on what I just mentioned. You have to create or repurpose the information in a different way, analyze it through a different lens. So you're repurposing it, you're operationalizing it in a different way, but it can still contain some of the ideas. For instance, you see this a lot in, I mentioned jargon words, specialized words that are specific to certain fields. You know, we have medical terminology, we have sociological terminology. It depends on what you're studying and what field you're looking at. or examining as to what types of language you may find in your research. You can incorporate those words, those jargon words, that's fine, but the sentence structure has to be largely different. We also paraphrase when the information is helpful to illustrate a point, but the exact wording isn't crucial. So it's the opposite of why we would use quotes, right? We don't need the verbatim. We don't need all of the words, all of the structure and syntax and word order of the sentence in order to make the point. And so in that case, you can paraphrase it to get the point across in a different way. Really mold it into your content the way that you need it. For instance, the source here mentions, I divide this map into two parts, that which anyone can do now and that which requires the help of lawmakers. And so that's coming straight from the source by Lessig, written in 2004, published in 2004. In the paraphrase version, we have an attribution with the author's last name and a verb. Lessig, 2004, argues that legislators will need to address the problem, but that other people can get involved as well, and then a page number. This is the appropriate way that you would paraphrase from this initial source. Notice it's completely different. There is an attribution involved that gives the source author credit, but it's not just taking the same words and it's not the same sentence structure. It's reworking that in such a way that would fit within the context of wherever this is going, whatever paper it belongs in, etc. Paraphrasing repurposes the information from a source so that it plays a supportive role. I already mentioned that. It must rely on the writer's own sentence structure and vocabulary. In other words, style. When you paraphrase, it's coming from your unique style, your unique writing mind frame that no one else shares. And so it has to be your own sentence structure, vocabulary, and style, even down to the way that you use your punctuation. And that's another reason that people fall victim to plagiarism when they try to mimic so closely the sentence structure and how the punctuation is used, but it's completely different than the style in the rest of your document. That's a clear red flag that some plagiarism is occurring. Here's another example. The initial source states, citizens of this generation witnessed the first concerted attempt to disseminate knowledge about disease prevention and health promotion, downplaying or omitting altogether information about disease treatment. An effective paraphrase of that initial source would be, Murphy, 1991, points out that in the first half of the 19th century, people worked hard to spread information about how to prevent disease, but did not emphasize how to treat diseases. Page 141. So here, we've taken the source, we've made an attribution with the author's last name and a verb, points, and then we just paraphrase it. We reword it to get the crucial points across that we need in our specific purpose and paper that we're working on, and that's done in the second effective paragraph at the bottom. Plagiarism occurs when a writer goes through a sentence from a source and inserts synonyms without rewriting the sentence as a whole. Again, I warned you about that. I caution you not to do that. It's very easy to pick up. It's very obvious to see when someone has done this. Or also improperly attributing or citing. So these are the two biggest culprits that I usually see when I am evaluating cases with the honor board or determining whether or not a student is going to be penalized for being charged with plagiarism. It's usually because they're taking content and changing a few words without making the content their own or effectively paraphrasing it, or they're not citing, they're not giving a citation where it's due, or they're doing it incorrectly. Remember, when I keep mentioning APA and style guide and how important it is that every single rule is followed, this is why that matters. Citations, not just formatting, but citations are part of that style guide. And if you don't do them correctly by the style guide, that's grounds for plagiarism. And so, again, you can't claim ignorance. You have been presented with how to do this in English 110, and if you end up making some type of mistake, I mean, you can face some pretty severe consequences. So it's important to know how to do these things. Here's an example, an initial source. Citizens of this generation witnessed the first concerted attempt to disseminate knowledge. It's the same one I just read. Plagiarism. People of this period observed the first organized effort to share information about preventing disease and promoting health, emphasizing or skipping completely information about treating diseases. There is a citation there. We see an intact citation at the end of the sentence with the author's last name, year, page number. However, this is still plagiarism. Even though we have given credit to the author, you are still using the exact sentence patterns and changing the words. That is considered plagiarism. You can't do that. Just because you put a citation in does not mean you can almost verbatim copy. You have to change the materials, or it needs to be a direct quote in some way. So you have to learn how to plagiarize correctly. You have to learn how to write and incorporate content into your own writing style, or you either way have to know how to make attributions or citations, because you're almost going to do this every 2 to 3 sentences in your writing to be safe. I know it's a lot of information, so you're probably asking, what do I do? How do I do all this? How do I start writing and incorporating all these ideas or rules? These are the best steps here, my advice. Number one, learn the basic rules for how to make attributions and in-text citations for single, double, or multiple authors. Know where to find information regarding how to format the reference citation. So that's all of those complicated citations at the end of your papers. Learn which type of quote to use and why. So that's the 80-20 rule I mentioned. And start thinking critically about what types of sources you want to use, how and why they support your claims. As you sort through your sources, remember, you're going to be analyzing sources by ethos, pathos, and logos to determine which sources are the most credible or useful, right, from an academic standpoint. But you also have to always think of your own ethos, pathos, and logos and ask yourself, is the content I'm creating well balanced based on those 3 appeals? Learn how to manipulate quotations within a source. And also, these are some things that I commonly see in writing. So the very first block that you see, the ellipses and a bracket, I've taught many of you that you can use ellipses, which is just the 3 periods without brackets, in order to fuse sentences together or to add emphasis. It's a stylistic element. When we get to writing an APA for research, if you take that ellipses and you put it in brackets, that's used to manipulate a quote within a source. I will show you how to do this in just a moment when I exit out of the slides in terms of manipulating quotes with that bracket ellipses. Remember to always put your period after your in-text citation. So say, for instance, you have a quote here, your in-text citation. The period does not belong inside the quote. It belongs at the end of the citation. Remember to always refer to your author's ideas in present tense unless they're specifically referring to past, a study in the past. But if it's a generalized idea, say for instance, Melissa Smith points out so-and-so, you would say Smith, the year in parentheses, points out or explains or something similar. Always refer to authors and researchers by last name in your attributions and in your citations. You will never use the author's first name. In fact, we will never see that. You will see the author's first initial in the reference citations, but you'll never see a full name. So let me do this. I'm going to show you, let me pull this up here. One of the best sources you can use is APA Purdue OWL. It's owl.purdue.edu, and go to the APA Writing Lab. This is the Purdue Online Writing Lab. Some of you may have already seen this or may know about it. This tells you everything you need to know. Over on the left-hand side, you have an introduction to APA style, what that is. There's a workshop, a format guide. You want to ignore these other style guides because we're working in APA. And then if you click the overview and workshop, it takes you to where you get all the information you need to know about citing. Let's go to the style guide here, drop down. It shows you the general format. If you need to know, remember I said learn the basic rules about how to cite authors, how to cite a work with one author, 2, and then multiple. It shows you exactly how to do that, the in-text citations and the content of your writing. But then you can also look at the reference list. You have to know what type of source you're using. So if this is a physical book, a hard copy of a book that you're citing, this is how you would do that. It gives you the general format, and then it gives you an example of how that format is used. And this would go at the end of your references list. Again, you have to know what type of source you're using, how many authors are involved in that source. Sometimes you have translations. I mean, books, there's hundreds of types of this, so you have to know what type of source you're working with. If it's not a book, if it's an electronic source, you would click here. Here's a web page, how you find a web page, a Wikipedia article, which you never will.